So that, oh, okay. I think it's working. Hi everyone, my name is Garrett Rathbone. Thank you for coming today. I hope you guys are having a good morning. I am going to talk about streamlining your Drupal development. And I will continue on. So basically, I started working at VMLY&R a couple years ago now, almost. And at the time, all of our projects were still kind of one-offs. I mean, we use the basic Drupal install and go from there. We'd copy over code from our past projects. After I started, we started doing a bunch of smaller projects, incremental small projects that were all kind of similar, and it got to the point where it was like, well, why are we redoing this? Why are we reinventing the wheel every time? And so we had already had some tooling that we were using based on something called Doxel, which I'm sure a lot of you people have heard of, similar to Lando or Dev Desktop or whatever else, just a small local environment setup that's containerized. And so we were like, okay, well, what can we do? We'll start with this one project, and what can we take from that project, move it over? And we slowly kind of came up with this idea for a thing called Kit. That's not, I mean, we have it released out on packages and stuff, but that's not really what this is about. This is really just like these ideas that we have in Kit, these ideas that we have used and we try to use on new projects and try to slowly evolve. Oh wait. Okay, so what we're going to focus on are organization and standards, and then how to stop reinventing the wheel, and then after that, how to work on that wheel. We're still not using stone wheels anymore. Okay, so organization and standards. This idea that coming up with some sort of uniform way of doing things, even if it's not even that good, even if 20 people in the room absolutely hate how we're doing things, we at least all know that we're doing it that way. And then you can work on, you can try to incrementally update that. So that is what people have learned over the years of developing APIs and linting. And it's this idea that we need to make things predictable, right? And so we can do that by naming, by coming up with these standards. And so, not even 5 years ago, linting wasn't that big of a deal. People didn't do it. Somebody would write some JavaScript library, and then the next person would look at it and be like, why did you do it this way? Why are you using tabs instead of spaces? Why are you whatever else? And then somebody's like, well, what if we just make this uniform? We set up standards. And even though some people don't like it, you know how to do it. You know that it's predictable. You can run a software suite. You can code against it to help yourself out. You're helping yourself in the future. Okay, so as an example, back in the day, they eventually standardized on a king's feet, right? So the same thing. You finally pick that road and you stick with it. And throughout a project, I know that can be hard. As an example, when I started at VMLY&R, we were working on the Tennessee tourism account, and it was on Display Suite. And after we were working there, we were like, well, you know what? Let's try to get off of Display Suite. And we started trying to not use Display Suite. Instead, do view mode as pre-processing and basic twig. And then the 3 developers that were on it left, and more people came on. And now those people on there are like, well, is this in Display Suite? Is this going to be pre-processed? And even though, at the time we were thinking, well, we're going to try to make this better, what ends up being better for the long run, especially for long-term projects, because these Drupal sites are going to, you always think you're going to be creating a site and then in a couple years redeveloping it. That's not the case all the time. A lot of these sites end up lasting 5, 6, 7 years at this point, especially with the way that Drupal is allowing us to update dependencies and move towards Drupal 9 and incrementally update. So this idea is that you set a standard on the project, and even though it might not be the best idea, you work with that. And then you take notes. You think, how can I do this better later? Or you add comments and say, we did this differently because of this. So that way at least the person understands. You're helping yourself out in the future. Along with that, we do the same thing with naming conventions and patterns. And largely, again, that makes it predictable. That allows you to code against it. As an example, something we do, I don't know if a lot of people have used Drupal libraries. Libraries is an amazing tool. You basically are allowed to attach assets to templates. So that way when you load the template, the assets get automatically added. It makes your page size smaller because you're not loading a bunch of unnecessary assets. But we figured out a way to make that automatic. So based on naming convention, if you name a library a certain way, based on entity, view mode, and bundle, it will automatically attach to that twig template. So now we don't actually have to purposely go and attach it. And that makes it easier for us to understand not only where that file, or what you're looking at when you look at it. It's not name some random thing like, accordion library 1 or something, because, the hardest thing of naming, or the hardest part of programming is naming things, right? And everybody names things differently. So that makes it more uniform. And then at the same time, we're allowed to automatically attach stuff to that library. So, it makes it organized, and then also helps out in the future. Using existing standards, trying to go as semantic as you can with HTML. And I know that's, opinionated. Actually, you can do a lot of semantic things with HTML that then you can be like, well, that's not semantic, this is semantic. But this idea of at least trying to go along with standards, going along with some sort of library pattern lab, or not pattern lab, but library pattern. So like at Drupal, or not Drupal, at VMLY&R, we typically try to go off of eBay Mind patterns, which is an accessibility library for, advanced concepts like tabbing, or really any dynamic thing on the page, tabbing, drop downs that don't look like, regular select boxes, stuff like that. And then also just doing things the Drupal way. I'm sure each of you have dealt with a Drupal 7 site or maybe Drupal 8, where the person who you got the site from decided that they didn't even want to use Drupal to really build it. They basically just wrote their own controller, wrote their own access. It's super insecure, whatever else, and it made your life a living pain in the butt. And so just trying to go along with that Drupal way. There's so much documentation online. There's so many cool blog posts, and things are written daily, and we have a great community. And I mean, I know I myself, and I extend this out, that we have the KC Drupal user group. If you guys ever have any questions about anything, of whether you think it's the right way or whatever else, or like just want to throw off an opinion, contact me. Contact anybody in that group, and they're going to love talking to you. Okay, so stop reinventing the wheel. So as I said before, when I started VMLY&R, we were just taking the basic Drupal Composer project, installing it, and then going from there and updating it. But that doesn't really change. Every single project, we have multiple dependencies that we use. And we have some that we might only sometimes use. And so even though you might think, okay, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to add those dependencies, and it might take me like an hour or two to get all that stuff set up. If you just take that time, do it once, you just save yourself 2 hours from here on out. And then you can incrementally update it. Same with patches. It's annoying looking at patches online all the time. Add those into the dependency for the Composer project. And along with that, you're able to then set up a uniform folder structure that every project follows. So for config or front-end assets, your front-end assets might always be out of the doc root. Your config might always be set up a certain way. So it's there waiting for you. And that way, whenever somebody is like, well, where do I put this config? It's there. They already know it's there. Same with configuration for external services. Just having that basic configuration with placeholders or something. I mean, some of it might not even be used. You can just delete it immediately, but it's there and you're not having to go and search through old projects. Tooling, and this is a big thing that we started doing. We have a lot of tools that we use for our front-end builds and configuration, export, import, stuff like that, and syncing. Basically trying to copy down prod to your local but still enable all your local config. And so having that tooling uniform and actually, in a way in which where you can update it regularly is a good thing to do. But, it's hard to do that when you're just copying and pasting from each project. And again, this takes some time here and there, but it's worth looking into. It's worth thinking about, because if you don't think about it, then you don't know if you want to do it, right? Okay, profiles. So profiles are kind of an enigma in Drupal, because in the past, it was always kind of hard to deal with config. It was hard to deal with installing these things because config wasn't part of core. You could make feature profiles, which were kind of weird. And then once config came into core, it still got a little weird. And also, it's kind of confusing. You have UUIDs in there. You have site configuration that is relevant to a site. It's hard to make a profile. And even though there is a good documentation here, which you can look up, it's still a little hard. But mainly because you don't know what to include. It's kind of confusing. I mean, a lot of times we'll set up a standard profile. I mean, I typically did. And then from there on out, be like, okay, well, let's add all these projects into Composer, run Composer install these projects one by one, do a config export, blah, blah, blah. And, it's just a bunch of wasted time. When you can fork the standard profile, literally add lines of the modules you want to install, and go from there. And this documentation does a good job. I think some things to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of times, at least when I started, is that you're like, well, I want to make this install profile, and this is all the config I have, so I'm just going to drag and drop all this config into here. You don't really need to do that, and that actually can mess you up in the future, because a lot of times, let's say a module updates their config in a month from now, and they change a lot of their config, and they have updates. Now that config is going to be overwritten from that profile that you just took the old config and dropped in. So when you install it, that module installed, and you'll override the config. And so really, unless you're overriding something or you're creating something new, all that stuff is installed by default, so you don't have to worry about it. It comes down to the things that you do want to worry about, which is stuff like content types. Which is stuff like content types and meta tag defaults and view modes and view displays. So you can actually start building out like paragraph components, sliders and stuff like that, and have them installed in your profile. And then if you don't need them, delete them. One thing that I love for this is the roles and permissions, especially when you have content type set up, and config split configuration. Config split sucks to set up. It's still, I continually think, okay, well, I think I have it, and then I still, hate myself and beat my head on a table. And so having it set up and having uniform, okay, well, on prod, we're always going to have views disabled. We're always going to have advanced aggregation enabled. We're always going to have, Shield or Basic Auth installed on stage and dev. Having those set up where all you have to do is install them, that you don't have to worry about that anymore. You don't have to, give yourself a headache for 2 or 3 hours of sprint 0 by doing that. There are some problems that can arise. So for theme-related config, typically on every project, you're going to want to rename the theme to relevant to that project. You're not going to be, reusing the same theme name. You could, but because of that, the themes, things in the theme, like responsive image config, that uses the theme to set the responsive image config. So if you export responsive image config, it'll fail on install because that theme doesn't exist anymore. So there are things like that you have to pay attention to. And largely, unless you're just going to have to read the config to know whether you should or not, or you can just throw it in there and try to install a profile and see what happens, I guess. So yeah, another cool thing is the install form can be customized. So you can actually add fields to the install form that you can fill out, and then on form submission, save that to config. So that way you don't have to immediately after install make a bunch of changes, go to site settings and stuff that otherwise would not be there. Okay, themes. One thing we learned is that scaffold themes are way easier than base themes. The reason for that is base themes don't allow easy override, because even though you're going to have a slider, or tabs or accordions or whatever else. Let's say a component on a page in one site. On your next site, you might have it be a bit differently. You might have a call to action on it. You might instead have video sliders instead of image sliders. And so if it's base, you're then dealing with overriding that and trying to, actually going in the next theme and unsetting and overriding like different stuff in the theme, when if you scaffold, you just have this piece that you move over and then work from there. It becomes a lot easier, because I do this a lot too, is you think, well, this is componentized. I can move this, I can install this, and then you actually do it and you're like, well, now I'm spending so much time trying to hack the stuff I don't want of it. It becomes easier, especially for one-off projects where you're not, having to then take that same component and like do it into another multi-site in the same project or something. Let's see. Keeping your functions organized on your module file. A lot of times people just throw those in there. And I'm going to preface this, a lot of the stuff might be super, obvious. But it is stuff that should be said in case somebody hasn't said it. So keeping stuff alphabetized. One thing that we do now is keeping all of our preprocesses, templates, compiled assets, and libraries in the theme, if possible. In the past, and with features, it became way common to kind of componentize, because the config was there, the functionality was there, the styles were there, and it was all componentized. But now with the config out of there, it doesn't really matter anymore. You're kind of just separating this code for purpose versus like readability in the future. It's easier to know, okay, well, if I need to edit this, I just go to the theme. Not, well, I might go to the theme, but I might go to this module, but then this module might also be updated by this module, and this module might have an override for this module because it's a slider, but it's not a hero. So, it makes it easier just putting it all in one place. One thing we started doing was grouping preprocesses based on entity into like certain files. So right here, we actually have a folder called preprocess/block.preprocess.php. So literally it's just a PHP file with all the preprocesses for blocks and all the preprocesses for media and node. That makes it easier to find stuff, and it also makes your module folder less like cumbersome. You're not having to just search through like thousands upon thousands of lines of code. Same with template structure was something that we started doing, where a lot of times, when I want to add a class to a template, you think, well, I'm going to just add class in here. But by doing that, that makes that a one-off item. You're not able to change that for a certain scenario. So let's say we have a teaser view mode. We want to reuse that teaser view mode. And on news content types, we want to add a certain class. And so if we would add that in the Twig template, and then we say, well, actually on this other one, we want to use the same code, but we don't want to have that class in there anymore. But since we added in the Twig template, you can't remove it. You either copy and paste that code, and now you have two Twig templates that are basically the same thing. Or you remove the add class declaration and just do it in a preprocess, so that way you can easily modify it later. And by doing it that way, our templates are using very basic structure. So, article with attributes, a link with link attributes, just a media object, a title or label, noteworthy, which is just a placeholder where you can replace that with really anything in the preprocess. It's just structure.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not familiar with scaffold themes.
Well, I call it scaffold themes. It's not like a real thing. It's kind of like, this is the code that we use, copy and paste it, rename type of thing. So you're scaffolding from it versus using a base or a parent. Does that make sense? Or is that even more confusing? It's
a starter theme.
Yes, a starter theme. It's just a starter theme versus a base theme. So it's not like really a parent. It's not always it's not a module that's installed and you have another a theme that's installed and another theme below it. You just have one theme that has all of your code in there, and you can modify it if needed. And so it's just a starter where you copy and paste and go from there.
Okay.
Versus base, which a lot of times, like we had talked at VMLY&R, we kind of do have a base theme. It's not really, it's not opinionated. It really just kind of does some helpful functions for us. Yeah, sorry. Hopefully that clarified. Hopefully I didn't confuse you more.
No, I think
okay.
That's better. Thanks.
Okay, so I mentioned the issue with featureizing, which, in Drupal 7 was very common. You'd featureize, you'd put a component into a module, and you'd have the twig, or you'd have the PHP code or the TPL file in there, along with assets and everything else. Well, that's gone now. And so what about this functionality that needs to be done relative to the theme or a component, but you can't do it because the theme doesn't allow you to? We actually started doing a thing called like a site or theme core module. So it's like in the Nashville site, our theme was called VMC. And so we had a module called VMC core. And so anything relative to that, we threw into VMC core. And then outside of that, we would try to make these, if we had certain functionality, we would either break it out where it made sense, or we'd make a more generic option for handling that module. And being generic when you're on a time limit can be hard. Sometimes it might take an extra 30 minutes. Sometimes it might take an extra day or something. And you have to weigh that. You have to weigh that option. But there are ideas that you can do to make it more generic. So like when you're writing your code, instead of naming things relative to that project, name it relative to what it is. And that way, if you need to use it in the future, copy and paste it, and you're doing less renaming and stuff like that. It's just this idea of thinking in a generic term. Okay, let me see. Where was I? Okay, improve the wheel. So there's this idea of incremental development, right? So as I already said, you take this, what you're working on, and you have it, and then you start a new project. And then from there on out, a lot of times what's hard is keeping it updated, right? But a good way to do that is using Sprint 0 for your next project. Is you take that project, you copy it over, or you use that project that you've been working on, like your distribution project. And you're like, well, all these things that we did in the last project, I want to move these into our basic profile, or basic distribution. And then I also want to use them in this next project. So you take all these items, you put them into your base distribution, all the generic ones that are going to be used from there on out. And then once you hit that limit of, okay, none of this can be used anymore, I need to start using the project, that is when you go over. So you're not wasting time. You're not wasting non-billable time, and you're still helping yourself out in the future, if that makes sense. Yeah. Another thing is, as I mentioned before, keeping notes whenever you're building a project. Usually projects last multiple months or more. You're going to forget things, right? You're going to, and I did in the last project. Afterwards, we immediately wanted to start moving some stuff over and to start a new project, and then we had to sign a new scope, and I kind of forgot a bunch of stuff. And now I'm going back, scratching my head, being like, what was that I wanted to move over? I can't remember. It had something to do with blah, blah, blah. And as I'm telling you, I didn't do it. I kept notes. They're pretty crappy. My handwriting's crappy. But it's good to do that. And I really enjoy doing them in comments. Making a comment saying, we built it this way. To-do might, or, put a to-do in there and say, might be a good potential update for later to make it into this way or something. That way, you can just look for to-dos or notes or C's or whatever else in your code. Okay, so we focused on organizing standards, stopping reinventing the wheel, and improving the wheel. And so basically that's it. But I figured there would probably be questions, or if you guys want to ask anything at all, I'm here. So thank you for coming.
Thanks. I have a question. Have you thought about using like a code generator like Yeoman or something for your scaffold themes?
We do. Well, yes and no. We actually kind of do. We have like a repo set up, and then we have a command where it copies the repo over, and then it asks you what you want to call it, and it'll automatically rename everything for you. It's pretty janky. I wrote it one afternoon. So what was that? What you called?
Well, so I don't know if you've used it at all, but Media Current, like last year, put out essentially a theme generator.
Okay.
It's really just a handful of Yeoman scripts that will just generate Twig files and Sass files and JavaScript files for you.
All right, right.
Essentially like, hey, generate a component, and you give it a name, and you specify what directory it goes in, and it creates like a Twig file, a Sass file, a JS file if you want.
Cool.
Automatically scaffolds will probably like the Drupal behaviors, and so I don't know if you thought about doing something
That's
like
cool.
that for it.
I'll look into
That's
that.
kind of what we've been using for like our scaffoldings. We kind of did the same thing instead of always making a sub-theme of another distribution of a theme. We've been using more like a scaffolding of like, hey, here's a bare bones. It has a flex grid and breakpoints and colors. And then from then you just essentially generate the rest of the code you want for your theme.
Yeah. I'll look into that. That's right.
It's called Media Current Drupal Theme Generator.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we forked it into the quality theme generator.
Yeah, we forked it just to, I fixed like, they weren't automatically adding the attached library. It's like, well, you typed in the name of the component and it makes the library. Just also fill that in and then added in extra options for different like CSS grids.
Okay. Tight.
I don't know, works pretty good.
Yeah, we're doing Jacob in the purple. He's been the forerunner, or really like the driving force behind all of our front end stuff for our stuff, which I actually didn't really get into other than the library attachment. I will mention that library attachment thing has helped us work really well with our front end devs that don't know much about Drupal. Mainly because they can get a site install and they don't have to worry about anything on the back end. They just need to make sure they name their files correctly, and then it'll automatically attach to what they're working on. And it's made life a lot easier. And so are you going to talk?
You can.
No, I mean not now. I mean to, like either today or tomorrow. Are you giving a talk?
No.
Okay. I know another. If you want to hear about the performant libraries stuff we've been doing, Ryan Schooley is going to be in this room at 2. So, so we do some stuff where we have like the base source files and stuff. A lot of it is mainly like we have like everything in the kitchen, or the whole kitchen sink or whatever the phrase is, and then we just take out what we don't need or modify from there. So, I'll look into that though. That's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Well,
one thing we can kind of talk about real fast, if we have time, is when you mentioned taking notes. Instead of like sticky notes or like something on somebody's computer, maybe in the project we put a notes markdown file or text file, and we can ignore it from being pushed up.
yes.
But have a centralized place in the theme, in the project, that any developer can add notes of things for next time.
Yeah, right. Also, another thing I want to mention, and you guys might do this, I love comments in general. If you want to leave me a 2-paragraph long comment, great. I mean, that helps me in the future understand where your mind was at when you wrote that component. And especially even if you have to walk me through it, I mean, comments they're not going to make the code run any slower. So, within reason.
Well,
but
our minifiers strip them off.
yeah,
anyway,
I guess
so.
you're right. But so the idea is that comments are good too. I just want to throw that there. Sorry. I'm going to keep coming up with random things if I don't stop talking. So, if anybody doesn't have any questions, then I guess I'll call it early, or 5 minutes early, or whatever it is. So, okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks.